I bought my daughter the car of her dreams, but she wouldn't even let me inside. Don't get in. Your clothes smell like old age. I swallowed the insult, but a week later the mechanic called. Your daughter wrecked the car. I started the repairs. But what I found inside, I'm shaking. You need to come down here immediately. I'm calling the police. Dear listeners, before we open this difficult chapter of my life, I ask for a little support. If stories about a woman's strength and justice resonate with your heart, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and write in the comments which city you are listening from. It is very important to us. And now enjoy the story. The wind that evening in Chicago was particularly sharp, cutting right through to the bone. But the cold that gripped me in that moment had nothing to do with the weather. I stood on the sidewalk, my whole body trembling with a fine, nasty shiver. In front of me, gleaming under the streetlights, stood the cherry red SUV. Huge, predatory, and flawlessly new. My daughter's dream car. I looked at this vehicle not as a means of transportation, but as a monument to my 10 years of self-denial. In every line of its body, in the shine of the chrome rims, I saw not metal but years of my life. For 10 years I hadn't bought myself any cheese more expensive than the generic store brand. For 10 years I wore the same shoes until the soles were thin as paper. I refused vacations, new books, and even medication that could have eased the ache in my joints just to put penny after penny away. I worked in the library, breathing in dust and guarding every dollar in an old tin tea, just to one day see happiness in Renee's eyes. And the moment had finally arrived. I took a step toward the passenger door. I wanted so badly to feel the softness of the beige leather, to inhale that intoxicating new car smell that signifies success. I just wanted to sit next to my child and take a victory lap around our neighborhood. But as soon as I reached for the handle, Renee abruptly blocked my path. She didn't just stand between me and the car. She recoiled as if I were contagious. No, Mama. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but in the night silence it cut me deeper than a knife. She quickly glanced around, checking to see if any neighbors or passers-by were watching this scene. Her eyes, usually so clear, were narrowed with irritation. You're taking the bus, she stated flatly. Don't get inside. I froze. The air got stuck in my throat. But why, Renee? I breathed out, feeling everything inside me compress into a ball of ice. I wanted to ride with you. I bought it for you. Renee grimaced as if she had a toothache. She leaned in closer and I caught the scent of her expensive perfume. Something floral, sharp, trendy. It's not about the car, Mama. It's about you. She motioned with her eyes toward my coat. My old gray wool coat that I had been wearing for the 7th winter in a row. Your clothes, they smell like old age. That smell, it soaks into everything. Into the upholstery, into the plastic. I can't let my new life, my new car smell like mothballs and mustastiness. Do you understand? The words hung in the air. Smells like old age. I couldn't find an answer. I just stood there feeling my legs turn to cotton. My daughter, my Renee, whom I rocked at night when she was teething, to whom I gave the best pieces of meat from the stew while leaving only the broth for myself. She was now looking at me with disgust. To her, I wasn't a mother who had performed a miracle for her dream. I was a source of an unpleasant odor, a contaminant. Go to the bus stop. The number 25 will be here soon. She tossed out, opening the door and quickly sliding into the driver's seat so that, God forbid, the street air wouldn't mix with the climate control of her personal paradise. The engine purred softly, the red tail lights flared, and the car smoothly pulled away from the curb, leaving me alone in the darkness. I watched the cherry red shine dissolve into the traffic and felt a massive gaping hole open up in my chest where a minute ago joy had beaten. I went home on the bus. The cabin was half empty. Dim lights flickered over the potholes. I sat by the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass, and stealthily sniffed the sleeve of my coat. What did I smell like? I inhaled deeply, trying to be objective. I smelled of lavender soap, the simplest bar soap I bought at the discount store. I smelled of old paper, the sweet dry aroma of library books, among which I had spent my entire life. I smelled of medicine, valerian root, and balm for my back. It wasn't the smell of old age or dirt. It was the smell of an honest, hard life, the smell of a black woman who had forgotten about herself for the sake of another human being. But Renee called it the smell of old age. And in her world, the world she was so desperate to enter, there was no place for that smell. I swallowed the insult. We mothers are virtuosos at that. While the bus crawled across the bridge, I had already started making excuses for her. She's young. She's nervous. She has her engagement to Julian coming up soon. She wants to be perfect. She didn't mean to hurt me. She's just very sensitive to smells. I talked myself into it, packing the shards of my dignity into a back drawer of my consciousness, as I had done hundreds of times before. But the following week passed in deafening silence. The phone didn't ring. Renee didn't call to say thank you. Didn't call to ask if I got home okay. And in that silence of my small apartment among the shelves of books, something terrible began to happen. The insult I had swallowed didn't digest. It began to transform. At first it was a heaviness, then a cold, clear understanding. My sacrifice was not an act of love to her. It was her due. I was a resource, and I myself was an annoying appendage to the wallet, which now, having been emptied, had simply become a burden. Exactly 7 days passed. It was Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my armchair with a volume of James Baldwin trying to read, but the lines blurred. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the ring of the old landline phone. I picked up the receiver. Angela Vance. The voice was male, rough, smoky, but I could hear the tension in it. Yes, that's me. Who is this? My name is Sebastian Cole. I'm a mechanic from the shop on the outskirts of town. He paused and I heard him breathing heavily. Your daughter, Renee Vance. She wrecked the car. The world tilted. The book fell from my knees to the floor. Is she alive? Where is she? My voice broke into a scream. Alive, healthy, not a scratch, the mechanic said quickly, but there was no relief in his tone, rather anger. She hit a guardrail, smashed the front end, got scared and ran. Left the car right there on the highway. The tow truck brought it to me an hour ago. I found your info in the glove box on the bill of sale. Thank God. I exhaled, pressing the receiver to my chest. Thank God she's alive. I'll pay for the repairs, Sebastian. Please don't call the police. She's young. She got scared. Listen to me, Angela, he interrupted, and his voice became as hard as metal. I am going to call the police, but not because of the accident. I started taking apart the door to assess the damage, removed the panel. A pause hung there, long and ominous. I could only hear the hum of wires and the distant clatter of tools on the other end of the line. What? What did you find? I asked, feeling that cold. The same one from the bus stop a week ago, crawling down my spine again. Sebastian lowered his voice as if afraid he might be overheard even in his own garage. It's not just car damage, Angela. It's about what she hid inside the door panels under the soundproofing. I've seen a lot in 30 years of work. Drugs, money, weapons, but this. He stumbled, searching for words. What I saw, it's got me shaking. You need to come down here immediately. This concerns you personally. I slammed the phone down without even asking for the exact address. I knew that district of garages where they fixed what the official dealers wouldn't touch. 40 minutes later, a taxi dropped me off at the gate of bay number 412. The smell here was thick and honest, a mixture of motor oil, burnt rubber, and cold metal. It was the smell of labor, nothing like the sterile, lifeless air my daughter breathed. The door opened slightly, and a large man in greasy coveralls stepped out. Sebastian. His face was etched with wrinkles, his hands black from work, but his eyes looked straight at me with a strange, painful sympathy. He didn't waste time on greetings, just silently nodded and motioned for me to come inside. In the middle of the garage, under a bright lamp, it stood. My cherry-red Pride, now looking like a wounded beast. The front bumper was crumpled, a headlight shattered, the hood buckled. But Sebastian didn't lead me to the hood. He led me to the driver's side door, which was dismantled. The plastic paneling lay on the floor, exposing the metallic guts of the mechanism. The lock mount snapped from the impact, he explained dully, wiping his hands on a rag. I reached inside to straighten the rod and found this. He pointed to the workbench. There, among wrenches and screwdrivers, lay a thick leather briefcase. It had been wrapped in a layer of gray foam, clearly to stop it from rattling while driving. Open it, Sebastian said. You need to see this for yourself. My fingers trembled as I touched the cold leather. The lock clicked. I lifted the lid. There was no money inside, no illegal substances. There lay a folder with transparent sleeves. On the first page, printed in large letters, wedding script planned the aristocrats. I turned the page. There were photographs, a man and a woman, both older, elegant, with noble faces. Under them, captions: actor, role of father, retired diplomat; actress, role of mother, pianist. What is this? I whispered, feeling the earth slipping from under my feet. Why does she need actors? Sebastian was silent. He simply turned one more page with his heavy, rough hand. And then I saw it. Official paper, the seal of vital records, my last name, my first name, Vance Angela Marie, date of birth and date of death 3 years ago. Cause of death, massive ischemic stroke. It became absolutely quiet in the garage. Even the hum of the transformer somewhere in the corner seemed to fade. I stared at the sheet of paper and the letters blurred before my eyes, turning into black holes. I died 3 years ago while I was skimping on food. While I was walking everywhere to save an extra $20, while I was giving her my life drop by drop to her, I was already dead. Officially documented. She erased you. Sebastian's voice sounded like a verdict. To marry this guy, Sterling. She needed aristocrat parents, dead heroes, not a living mother who's a librarian with a small pension. Tears didn't flow. Instead, something inside me clicked and stopped. The cold that had pierced me a week ago now turned into ice. Hard, sharp, impenetrable ice. All that softness, the forgiveness, the endless excuses I had built around Renee's behavior for years crumbled into dust. I remembered her look at the bus stop. Your clothes smell like old age. Now I understood. To her I didn't smell like old age. I smelled like a threat to her lies. I was living proof of her deception. An inconvenient piece of evidence that needed to be hidden far away, or better yet, destroyed completely. Sebastian reached for the phone on the wall. This is a felony, Ms. Vance. Forging government documents, fraud. I'm calling the police. Let them deal with your daughter. My hand shot forward faster than thought and covered his hand, stopping it halfway to the receiver. No, I said. My voice sounded unexpectedly firm, even to myself. There was no tremor in it. Sebastian looked at me in surprise. You're protecting her after this? He nodded at the death certificate. No. I slowly shook my head, looking straight into his eyes. I'm not protecting her. I'm protecting the truth. If you call now, she'll wiggle out of it. She'll say it's a joke, a prank for a party, a prop. She has Julian's lawyers. She has money. And I only have this piece of paper. She'll make me out to be a crazy old woman who doesn't understand anything. I took the folder and closed it. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot. I need 24 hours. The script says the engagement party is tomorrow night. Meeting the parents. I have to return this briefcase to its owner personally. Sebastian looked at me for a long time, squinting. He saw before him not just an elderly woman in an old coat. He saw someone else. Someone who had just been born in this cold garage on the ruins of her own maternal heart. You want to go there? He asked quietly. To the stirrings. I want to look her in the eyes when she sees her resurrected mother, I replied. The mechanic grunted, and a glint of respect flashed in his eyes. He walked over to the workbench, rummaged in a drawer and pulled out the car keys. The fob with the logo gleamed in the lamplight. You know what? He tossed the keys in the air and caught them. I wired the bumper back on, taped up the headlight. It looks scary, like a tank after a battle, but the chassis is intact. Radiator isn't leaking. He held the keys out to me. If you're going to war, Angela, a general shouldn't be riding the bus. Take the tank you paid for with your life. I took the keys. The metal felt cold in my palm, but this cold gave me strength. Thank you, Sebastian, I said. And one more thing, he nodded at the briefcase. There's something else in the folder. The script for the actors. Read it when you have a moment, especially the father's role. I nodded, pressed the briefcase to my chest, and headed for the car. My tank was waiting for me, mangled but still powerful, just like me. I sat behind the wheel on that same beige leather I was denied a week ago. Now I didn't care what I smelled like. Now I smelled of retribution. The engine responded with a low, guttural growl. I shifted into gear and drove out into the night toward my death and my resurrection. I parked the car in a neighboring courtyard between two old delivery trucks, so its crippled front end wouldn't catch the eye of casual passers-by. Climbing up to my third-floor apartment, I didn't turn on the light in the hallway. I needed time to get used to the darkness, both the one in the apartment and the one that had settled in my soul. Hardly had I sunk into the armchair, placing the briefcase on my knees, when the phone in my coat pocket vibrated. The screen lit up with the name Baby Girl. Before, just a week ago, seeing that name made my heart beat faster with joy. Now it shrank with disgust. But I knew I had to answer. I had to play my role while she played hers. Yes, Renee. My voice sounded surprisingly calm, even soft. The old habit of protecting her peace worked automatically. Mama. Hi. Her voice chimed like a bell. Sweet, caring, flawlessly fake. I'm sorry I vanished. You know how crazy work is right now. I just haven't had a moment to lift my head. She didn't mention the accident. Not a word about the wrecked car. Not a word about leaving it on the highway. She was sure the vehicle was sitting in some obscure shop, and I, the stupid old mother, was sitting at home knitting socks, suspecting nothing. I understand, baby, I answered, looking at the folder with my death certificate lying before me. Work is important. Are you taking care of yourself? Trying, Mom. Trying, she sighed theatrically. Listen, actually the reason I'm calling, I had some unexpected medical expenses come up. A tooth started hurting, had to get it treated urgently, and insurance doesn't cover it. The lies poured out of her so easily, so naturally. I imagined her right now, probably sitting in some trendy cafe, drinking a latte, fixing her perfect makeup, and lying to the mother she had already buried on paper. She was trying to squeeze the last juices out of a ghost before slamming the door on her past life for good. Oh, poor thing, I sympathized. Of course teeth are painful. How much do you need? Well, if you could transfer your Social Security check that comes tomorrow, that would really help me out. I'll pay it. All back. Promise, cross my heart, as soon as I get my bonus. She knew the check arrived tomorrow. She remembered the payment schedule better than my birthday. Of course, Renee, I said, and my voice trembled, not from pity, but from the realization of the abyss of her cynicism. I'll go to the bank first thing tomorrow morning. You only eat well. Okay, you're the best, Mommy, she chirped. Okay, I got to run. Don't call me tonight. All right, I have a migraine. I'm going to bed early. Sleep tight, daughter. Click. She asked me not to call because tonight she had the dress rehearsal for her new life. She felt completely safe. In her world, I was a harmless, senile old woman, a resource to be used and discarded. She couldn't imagine that the resource was sitting in the dark, holding the blueprint of her destruction in her hands. I put the phone down and turned on the desk lamp. The light fell on the leather briefcase. Sebastian said to look at the script, especially the father's role. I opened the folder. The sheets were printed on thick, expensive paper. Scene 1, greeting guests. Father, alias Alexander P. Kensington, diplomat, reservedly greets the groom, mentions years of service at the embassy in Vienna, carries himself with dignity, slightly haughty. Mother, alias Elizabeth A. Kensington maintains conversation about classical music, complains about modern art. Attached below was the profile of the actor approved for the role of the father. The photo was black and white, professional, a man of about 60 with noble gray hair and tired eyes. I stared at the face. Seemed vaguely familiar. Those deep folds by the lips, that high forehead. I had seen him before. Not in the movies, not in the theater. I had seen him here in my library. Memory trained by years of working with catalogs. Obligingly pulled up the image. 5 years ago, winter. A man in a shabby coat came every Tuesday. He checked out books that few people read, memoirs of Stanislavski, rare editions of plays. He was always polite, but in his eyes lay such hopeless anguish that my heart ached. Silas Cross. Yes, that was his name. An actor from the local drama theater, who had been laid off during budget cuts. He had lost everything then, his job, his room in the boarding house. He came to the library not just for books but simply to get warm. I remembered one evening the library was closing and he was still sitting in the reading room, head in his hands. I walked up to him. He raised his eyes. There were tears in them. He admitted he had nowhere to go, that he hadn't eaten in 2 days. I broke all the rules that night. I let him sleep in the supply room on the old sofa. I brought him soup in a thermos and biscuits from home, and in the morning gave him money for a bus ticket to the next county where he said his aunt lived. He had taken my hands in his, kissed them and said, I will never forget this, Miss Vance. You saved my life. And now Silas Cross, the man I once fed and warmed, was to play the role of my husband, the role of a father who is ashamed of his own daughter, or rather the role of a father to a daughter who is ashamed of me. Fate wore its patterns with frightening irony. I traced my finger over the photo. Silas, he agreed to this lie. Surely poverty forced him. Money for a role like this could feed him for months. Did he know whose death he was supposed to confirm with his presence? The script didn't have my real name, only the fictional Kensington's. Most likely for him this was just another gig, a strange whim of a rich girl. But he knew me. He remembered me. I was sure of it. A plan began to form in my head. It was risky, insane, but it was the only chance to not just expose the lie, but to do it so Renee would learn the lesson for a lifetime. I closed the folder. The fear was gone. Only cold determination remained. Tomorrow evening at the restaurant, the Gilded Lily. A performance would take place, but the director would no longer be me, nor even Renee. I stood up and walked to the closet. I pushed aside the hangers with everyday clothes. In the farthest corner inside a garment bag it hung. My battle flag, a dark green velvet dress, floor length. It was 30 years old. I had sewn it for my husband's jubilee, but velvet doesn't age if it's real, just like dignity. I took it out, shook it. The fabric rustled heavily and nobly. Tomorrow I would wear it. Tomorrow I would go to my own funeral to be resurrected. The next evening met me with a fine drizzling rain, but I didn't notice it. I stood in front of the mirror, buttoning the last button on the cuff of the dark green velvet dress. It fit perfectly, as if time had stopped for it 30 years ago. The fabric hugged my figure tightly, hiding my age and emphasizing a posture that even 10 years of scrimping couldn't bend. I didn't call a taxi to the front door. I didn't want the neighbors to see me like this. Too dressed up, too solemn for a regular Thursday. I walked 2 blocks, clutching a clutch bag in my hand, inside of which lay not a mirror and lipstick, but my death certificate. At the intersection I hailed a car. The driver, a young guy, whistled when I got in. Going to the theater, ma'am. You look beautiful. To the circus, I answered curtly. To the Gilded Lily. The Gilded Lily was the kind of place where ordinary mortals like me entered only by mistake. Huge glass doors, a doorman in livery, soft light pouring from the windows onto the wet asphalt. I got out of the taxi, paid, and inhaled deeply. Along with the air, the aroma of white diamonds rushed into my lungs. I had applied it generously, sparing nothing. The heavy, thick, spicy scent of florals and aldehydes. For Renee it was the smell of old age, the smell of a grandmother's trunk. For me tonight it was the smell of power, the smell of history, a smell impossible to ignore. It filled the space, declaring, I am here. I exist. The doorman blocked my path, looking over my dress. It was old but flawless, and this confused him. Do you have a reservation? He asked politely but wearily. I am the coordinator for the special program for the Sterling banquet. I lied, looking him straight in the bridge of his nose. They are expecting me. I'm late with the props. The name Sterling acted like a magic spell. He stepped back, opening the heavy oak door before me. I entered the lobby. The sounds of the city were cut off. They were replaced by muffled piano music and the clinking of crystal. I knew where the VIP room was. Renee had once bragged that they rented the Imperial Lounge. I walked past the coat check without taking off my coat, as if I owned the place, and headed down the carpeted corridor. The doors to the hall were slightly ajar. I stopped in the shadow of a massive column to catch my breath and assess the disposition. The hall was magnificent. Stucco molding, gold, a huge chandelier sparkling with 1,000 lights. In the center stood a round table covered with a snow-white tablecloth. 4 people sat at the table. Renee sat with her back to me, but I recognized her by her tense posture and the way she nervously fingered the stem of her wine glass. She was wearing a champagne-colored dress that exposed her shoulders and a diamond necklace that probably cost as much as my entire apartment. Next to her was Julian, young, handsome, with an open, slightly naive face. He looked at Renee with adoration, unsuspecting that he was sitting next to a chimera, and opposite them sat the parents. The woman, the actress, was overplaying her role. She dabbed her lips with a napkin too often, held her fork too affectedly. But Silas Cross looked as if he were being tortured. His tuxedo fit loosely. He constantly adjusted his bow tie and hardly raised his eyes from his plate. Yes. Renee's voice reached me, ringing with feigned sadness. Mama was an amazing woman, a pianist, a competition laureate. She dreamed so much of seeing this day, but a stroke. It happened so suddenly. 3 years have passed and the pain still doesn't subside. Julian covered her hand with his. I'm so sorry, Renee. I'm sure she would be proud of you. She would be happy to know that I am in such a wonderful family. The actress' mother chimed in, dabbing a dry eye. Alexander and I, she nodded at Silas, always knew our girl deserved the best. Silas was silent. He picked up his glass of water and I saw his hand trembling. Water splashed over the rim. Careful, darling. His wife hissed, kicking him under the table. I saw that. Then louder. Alexander is still very much grieving the loss of his sister. The lie was growing like a snowball, filling the entire space of the room. I felt physically sick. My daughter was burying me alive, watering my grave with the sweet syrup of hypocrisy and forcing strangers to participate in this farce. The hour had struck. I took off my coat and draped it over the arm of a waiter who was just passing by with a tray. He was taken aback, but I had already stepped into the light. I didn't run, didn't scream. I entered the hall slowly, smoothly, like a large ship entering a port. The heels of my shoes clicked dully on the parquet, but no one turned around. Everyone was absorbed in the toast. To the memory of Angela Kensington, Julian proclaimed, raising his glass. A lovely toast, I said loudly. My voice rang out clearly, bouncing off the high ceilings. All 4 of them flinched and turned around. Renee froze. The glass in her hand tilted, and a drop of red wine fell onto the snow-white tablecloth, spreading like a blood stain. Her face, rosy and lively a second ago, instantly turned gray as ash. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. Silas Cross, seeing me, dropped his fork. It hit the plate with a ring, and in the ensuing silence, the sound seemed deafening. He recognized me. I saw it in the way his eyes widened, the way he pressed back into his chair. I walked closer, stopping a couple of meters from the table, directly under the shine of the chandelier. My green velvet dress absorbed the light, making me look like a dark monolith amidst their sparkling celebration. I didn't look at Renee. I looked at the waiter frozen by the wall. Champagne, I commanded in an even authoritative tone. Bring me a glass. I want to drink to the memory of Angela Vance, a woman who, strangely enough, stands before you right now, dying of thirst, but not from a stroke. The silence became so thick it felt like you could cut it with a knife. Julian confusedly shifted his gaze from me to Renee, then to the parents. Who is this? He asked quietly. But in the silence, his question sounded like thunder. Renee snapped out of her stupor. She jumped up, knocking over her chair. The crash tore through the numbness. This is nobody, she squealed, and her voice no longer held aristocratic notes. Only the panic of a market trader caught stealing. Julian, don't listen to her. This is my former nanny. She rushed toward me, trying to shield me from her fiancé with her body. Leave. She hissed in my face, spitting slightly. Get out of here, you crazy woman. Security. Where is security? She turned to Julian. Her eyes were darting around. She has dementia, darling. She's an old sick woman. She worked for us 100 years ago. She confuses reality. She thinks she's my mother. Look at her. She smells like mothballs. I stood motionless, letting her choke on her own lies. The scent of white diamonds enveloped us, and I saw Julian grimace. Not from the smell, but from his fiancée's hysteria. Nanny? He asked, frowning. But you said you were raised by governesses from France. Yes, but this was before them, in early childhood. She's crazy. Julian, call the police. Let them take her to the asylum. I slowly shifted my gaze to Silas. He sat clutching the edge of the table with white-knuckled fingers. Sweat stood out on his forehead. He looked at me with horror and pleading. I took a step forward, walked around Renee as if she were empty space and approached the table. I placed the clutch on the tablecloth, clicked the lock, and pulled out the folded sheet of official paper. Dementia is a terrible thing, Renee, I said quietly, looking her straight in the eye. It erases memory, but forging documents erases the future. That is a criminal offense. I unfolded the death certificate and placed it next to Julian's plate right on the crisp napkin. What is this? He whispered, picking up the paper. Don't touch it, Renee shrieked, trying to snatch the sheet. It's a fake. She printed it on a computer. She wants money. She's a blackmailer. Julian pulled his hand back, not letting her take the document. He scanned the lines. Vance Angela Marie, date of death. He raised his eyes to me, full of misunderstanding and dawning horror. But you're standing right here. Standing? I nodded, and as you can see, quite alive. But your fiancé buried me 3 years ago to gain the status of an aristocratic orphan. It's a lie. Renee wasn't shouting anymore. She was wailing. Papa, tell him. Tell him. She's a crazy nanny. She rushed to Silas, grabbing the sleeve of his tuxedo, shaking him. Papa, say something. Silas slowly stood up. He was a tall man. And now, straightening up, he suddenly stopped seeming pathetic. He shook Renee's hand off his shoulder with a disgusted movement. He looked at her, then at me. Something changed in his eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by that same anguish I had seen in the library, but now mixed with resolve. I can't, he said hollowly. What can't you do? Renee hissed. You got the money. Do your job. Silas turned to the room, to Julian, to the frozen waiters. I can't do this, he said loudly and clearly. His actor's voice, trained by years on stage, filled the hall. I know this woman. This is not a nanny. This is Angela Vance, the librarian. 5 years ago, she saved me from starvation. She gave me shelter when everyone turned away. She taught me to read Baldwin, not with my eyes but with my heart. He paused, and in the silence, the clink of a spoon in someone's cup was audible. She is not crazy, and she is definitely not dead. He tore the bow tie from his neck and threw it on the table. I am not the diplomat, Kensington. I am a failed actor, Silas Cross. And I am ashamed. I am insanely ashamed to participate in this circus. Silas's words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible as a fallen curtain. Renee froze with her mouth open. Her hand was still reaching for the place where her father's arm had been a second ago. The aristocratic mask cracked completely, revealing beneath it something pathetic, frightened, and vicious. You're drunk, she squealed, backing away from Silas. You're talking nonsense, Julian. He's just drunk. I told you we shouldn't invite relatives from the provinces. She stumbled, realizing her slip of the tongue, but it was too late. Julian slowly rose from his seat. His face, usually soft and smiling, had turned to stone. He wasn't looking at Renee, but at the sheet of paper he still held in his hand. My death certificate. Higher, he repeated quietly. You said higher. Renee rushed to him, trying to hug him, look into his eyes, use all her feminine charms that had worked flawlessly for the last year. Baby, I misspoke. I'm in shock. This crazy woman and this drunk conspired. They want to ruin our celebration. Kick them out. Please kick them out. She clung to the lapel of his jacket. Her nails with the flawless manicure dug into the expensive fabric, but Julian stood motionless as a rock. He carefully but firmly pried her fingers loose and pushed her away from him. Don't touch me, he said. In his voice there was no anger, only cold disgust. I want to hear her. He turned to me. You said you are her mother. Her real mother? Yes, Julian, I answered calmly. I gave birth to her 26 years ago at City Hospital No. 4. I raised her alone. I worked 2 jobs so she could go to university. I sold my parents' cottage to pay for her English courses. And I saved for 10 years to buy her that car she wrecked a week ago. Wrecked? Julian frowned. She said the car was at the dealership for scheduled maintenance. She wrecked it and left it on the highway. And inside in the door panel, she hid this document and the script by which we are now playing. Renee hissed like a cat cornered. Shut up. Shut up. Why did you come? Why are you ruining my life? She turned to me and I saw true hatred in her eyes. Not irritation, not shame, but black thick hatred. Look at yourself, she screamed, pointing a finger at me. You're pathetic. You smell of dust and poverty. You counted pennies your whole life. You walked in rags. I wanted to break out of this swamp. I wanted to live beautifully with dignity. And you? You are like an anchor. You dragged me to the bottom. I tried to protect Julian from this disgrace. From you. The hall froze. The waiters, the actress mother, even random guests peeking through the doors. Everyone watched this scene. I listened to her scream and felt a strange calm. The pain was gone. Only sadness remained deep as the sea. "You're right, Renee," I said quietly when she fell silent, choking on rage. "I really do smell." I took a step toward her. She flinched but didn't retreat. "I smell of library dust because that dust paid for your diploma. I smell of cheap soap because I bought the expensive shampoos for you. I smell of medicines I didn't take so you could wear silk. That is the smell of sacrifice, daughter. The smell of love that gives everything and asks for nothing in return." I took a breath. The scent of white diamonds swirled around me in a dense cloud, mixing with the smell of expensive food and Renee's fear. "And you?" I looked at her with pity. "You smell of French perfume that costs $500, but underneath it, you smell of rot. The rot of betrayal. You sold your mother for status. You hired strangers to play a family you don't have because your real family seemed insufficiently elite to you." I turned to Julian. "Forgive me for this spectacle, Julian. I didn't mean to hurt you. You are a good man. I see that. You didn't deserve lies. I'm not here to ask for money or cause a scandal. I came to get the keys." "Keys?" he asked mechanically. "To the car. It's registered to me. I'm selling it as is. Wrecked. And I am annulling the deed. The apartment I signed over to Renee last month as a wedding gift. The paperwork hasn't been finalized with the city yet. I'm revoking it tomorrow morning." Renee's face distorted. That was a blow below the belt. A blow to the most painful spot, the wallet. "You wouldn't dare." She screeched and lunged at me. Her hand flew up for a slap. I didn't even flinch, ready to take the blow, but the blow never came. Julian caught her wrist an inch from my face. "Don't you dare." His voice was quiet but steel rang in it. "Don't you dare touch her." He threw her hand aside. Renee staggered and would have fallen if she hadn't grabbed the table. "Julian," she whispered, and tears, now real ones, spurted from her eyes. "You don't understand. She's a monster. She beat me in childhood." But Julian wasn't listening anymore. He looked at me closely, studying me. "My mother," he said suddenly, his voice trembling. "She died 5 years ago. In the photo on my mantelpiece, she's wearing a dress just like that dark green velvet. She only wore it for big holidays." He walked closer to me as if not believing his eyes. "You insulted not only your mother, Renee," he said without turning to his fiancée. "You insulted the memory of mine. You dragged a lie dressed in holy clothes into my house." At that moment, the doors of the hall burst open again. But this time it wasn't a waiter. Standing in the doorway was Sebastian. In his work coveralls, over which an old leather jacket was thrown. He looked like a foreign object here, but he didn't seem to care at all. Behind him loomed 2 figures in police uniforms. Renee saw them and turned so pale she became almost transparent. She backed away, knocking over the chair she was leaning on. "No," she whispered. Sebastian scanned the room, found me with his eyes, and nodded briefly. Then he pointed a dirty finger at Renee. "That's her," he told the officers. "Citizen Renee Vance fled the scene of an accident. We have the dashcam footage from a witness." He stepped forward, walking right across the expensive carpet, leaving traces of grease. He looked at Julian. "Sorry to barge in, Mr. Sterling, but we found not just the mother's death documents inside the door panel. There was a stack of loan agreements." "In my name?" Julian froze. "In your name?" "Yes. The signatures are forged, but the passport data is yours. She took out microloans and credit lines using your property as collateral. Apparently, the wedding was supposed to cover everything, but Sebastian spread his hands. The girl rushed it. The police moved toward Renee. She pressed herself against the wall. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, but there was no exit. The trap she had built for others had slammed shut on herself. Renee collapsed to her knees. It wasn't a theatrical fall rehearsed before a mirror, but a genuine animal collapse. Her legs simply refused to hold her. She covered her face with her hands and wailed, rocking from side to side. No, it's not true." She screamed through sobs. "Julian, they're lying. It's all her. She made me do it." She took her hands off her face and crawled toward Julian, grabbing the hem of his pants. Mascara flowed in black streams down her cheeks, turning her face into a terrifying mask. She beat me. Renee shouted, choking. She abused me all my childhood. She took all the money. I ran away from her. I was afraid of her. I forged the certificate so she wouldn't find me to protect us. Save me, Julian. She's a monster. For a second, silence hung in the hall. The tears of a young, beautiful woman are a powerful weapon. Even the police hesitated, exchanging glances. Julian looked down at her, and doubt flickered in his eyes. Pity is a dangerous feeling. It is capable of clouding the mind even in the face of obvious facts. I stood motionless. I knew she would say this. It was her last trump card to turn the victim into the executioner. I looked at my wristwatch, an old Timex on a worn strap. Right on time, I whispered. The doors opened again, and one more person entered the hall. It wasn't a policeman or a witness. It was a young guy in glasses with a laptop under his arm, Sebastian's assistant, whom I had seen in the garage. He silently walked to the table, opened the laptop, and turned the screen toward Julian. Sorry, he said awkwardly. Boss said to show this. We recovered the files from the dash cam. There's audio. An image appeared on the screen, the view from inside the car, the hood, the road, and Renee's voice. She was speaking on speakerphone. I don't give a damn about the old hag Lanka. Her voice rang from the speakers, cheerful, cynical. I bought her a ticket to a nursing home one way as soon as I get the ring. Let her rot there with her books. And Emile Julian will cover the loans. He won't even notice. He's such a sucker. You should see him. Believes every word I say. I told him my ancestors were counts or whatever, and he melted. Just got to make it to the wedding and then I'll be the lawful wife and he won't go anywhere. Laughter, cruel, triumphant laughter. And then the sound of impact, the grinding of metal and silence. The recording cut off. The room became so quiet I could hear my own heart beating. The doubt in Julian's eyes vanished. His face went white as chalk. He slowly backed away from Renee as if she were a poisonous snake. Sucker. Huh? He asked quietly. Renee stopped crying. She understood the game was over. The victim mask slid off just as quickly as the aristocrat mask. She stood up from her knees, brushed off her dress, and looked at Julian with cold malice. Yes, a sucker, she spat out. You and your family of snobs. You would never have looked at me if you knew I was the daughter of a librarian from the projects. You needed pedigree. I gave you pedigree. I played by your rules. She turned to me. There was not a drop of remorse in her eyes. Only the rage of a losing player. And you? She hissed. You ruined everything. You always ruined everything with your poverty, your righteousness, your dismal face. I hate you. I hate your smell, your clothes, your life. It would be better if you really had died. The police stepped toward her. One of them pulled out handcuffs. Citizen Vance, you are detained on suspicion of fraud on a particularly large scale and forgery of documents. Come with us. They clicked the metal onto her thin wrists. The cold click echoed off the gold stucco of the ceiling. Renee didn't resist. She proudly raised her chin, but her hands were trembling. Passing by me, she stopped for a second. I hate you, she whispered with her lips alone. I looked at her. My daughter, my little girl, whom I taught to walk, whom I nursed through chickenpox, to whom I read fairy tales at night. Where did I miss the moment when her heart turned to stone? I know, I answered quietly. It's a heavy load, Renee. Hate weighs more than love. Now you'll have to carry it yourself. I've dropped my load. She snorted and turned away, letting the police lead her out. The doors closed behind her back, cutting her off from the world of luxury she had strived for so hard, and sending her to a world of institutional walls and bars. Silas Cross walked up to me. He looked like he had aged 10 years in that evening. Forgive me, Angela, he said, looking at the floor. I didn't know. I really didn't know it was you. I thought I don't hold a grudge, Silas. I touched his hand. You acted according to your conscience. That is the main thing. Go. You have nothing more to do here. He nodded, squeezed my hand gratefully, and quickly left, not even glancing at the table of delicacies. The actress mother had evaporated even earlier as soon as the police appeared. We were left alone, Julian and I. He stood in the middle of the empty hall, bewildered, crushed. His ideal world had collapsed, exposing the ugly framework of lies. I am very sorry, Julian, I said sincerely. No one deserves such betrayal. He raised his eyes to me. There was pain in them but also some new adult wisdom. Thank you, he said hollowly. If not for you, I would have married an illusion. I would have lived a lie. He walked to the table, picked up the glass of champagne I never drank and held it out to me. To truth, Angela, however bitter it may be. I took the glass. To freedom, Julian. We clinked glasses. The ring of crystals sounded pure and clear, like the first strike of a bell for a new life. I finished the champagne, put the glass on the table, and picked up my clutch. Goodbye, Julian. I'll walk you out. He made a move toward me. No need. I smiled at him for the first time that evening. Truly, my tank and my mechanic are waiting for me. I walked out of the Gilded Lily into the night chill. The rain had stopped. The air was fresh and clean. Sebastian was waiting by his old pickup, parked next to my battered SUV. He was smoking, looking at the stars. Seeing me, he threw the cigarette down and crushed it with his boot. Well, General? He asked with a crooked grin. War over. Over, Sebastian, I replied, feeling an invisible mountain fall from my shoulders. We won. Where to now? Home. I looked at the cherry-red car, at its crumpled hood, at the broken headlight. It no longer seemed like a symbol of my sacrifice. Now it was just a piece of metal. An expensive, unnecessary piece of metal. No, I said. Tomorrow we sell this car. But right now, take me to the library. I want to be among books. They never lie. Sebastian nodded silently, opened the door of his old truck for me, and we drove off. Nighttime Chicago floated past the window in blurred lights, but I didn't look at the city. I looked inside myself, trying to understand what a person feels who has just sent their daughter to prison with their own hands. I expected pain, heart-tearing grief. But instead there was emptiness, quiet, ringing, sterile emptiness, like an operating room after a complex surgery is finished, and the patient has been wheeled out. The tumor was removed. Only the scar remained. It was quiet and dusty in the library. That very smell that Renee hated now seemed to me the dearest in the world. I spent the night there, sitting in an armchair between the shelves, sorting through old index cards, simply breathing that air. In the morning I knew what I had to do. The next 3 months flew by like one day, merging into a gray blur of bureaucracy and change. First thing, I sold the car. The buyer, a flipper with shifty eyes, clicked his tongue for a long time, examining the damage, and tried to drive the price down to something ridiculous. Bumper needs replacing, hood needs pulling, airbags deployed, he mumbled, kicking the tire. I'll give you half market value, and that's out of respect for your age. The price is final, I cut him off. Take it or leave it. The service book is in the glove compartment. Mileage is 200 m. Engine is brand new. This isn't scrap metal. It's an almost new car with a history. He bought it. The money, a heavy stack of bills, went into my bag. Before, I would have hidden them under the mattress, saved them for a rainy day for help for Renee when she got out. But before was over. I returned to my apartment and looked around. The old heavy wall unit taking up half the room, the faded wallpaper, the carpet that had been there since 1985. It was all soaked in the past, in the memory of sacrifices, of scrimping, of living for someone else. Enough, I said aloud. The next day I hired a crew of workers. Carry everything out, I commanded. The wall unit, the sofa, the rugs, everything to the dump. And the books? The foreman asked, looking at my shelves. Leave the books. Books are the only thing here that's real. The renovation was swift and ruthless. I tore off the wallpaper along with the memories. I painted the walls in light, warm tones, the color of baked milk, the color of the morning sun. I bought light, modern furniture. No bulky cabinets, no dust collectors. Air. I needed air. One day while I was choosing curtains, the investigator called me. Miss Vance, your daughter's case has been transferred to court. Julian Sterling withdrew the civil suit for the loans, paid her apparently, but the state charges for document forgery and fraud remain. She got 2 years in a minimum security facility considering her confession and lack of prior convictions. Thank you for informing me, I answered dryly. Do you want to come for a visit before the transfer? No, I said, she has a lawyer and I have a renovation. I hung up. Cruel possibly. But I knew if I went there, If I saw her eyes full of either fake remorse or that same hatred, I would break again. I would start saving her again. And saving her now meant destroying us both completely. She needed to walk this path herself to the very bottom so that maybe she could push off from it. When the renovation was finished, the apartment was transformed. It became spacious, bright, unfamiliar but pleasant. I sat on the new sofa, drinking tea from a thin porcelain cup. I bought myself a set I had dreamed of for 20 years, and looked at the stack of remaining money. There was a lot, enough for a comfortable old age, for medicine, for a trip to Florida every year. But I remembered Renee's words. Your clothes smell like old age. I stood up, walked to the mirror. A 62-year-old woman looked back at me, tired but with a straight back. I sniffed my wrist. The white diamonds had worn off. Only the smell of fresh paint and solitude remained. I needed a new smell, my own. Not the smell of a victim, not the smell of a mother, not the smell of a librarian, the smell of Angela. I opened the laptop I had mastered over these months. Sebastian helped pick out a simple model. In the search bar I typed one word: Grasse, France, Provence, the world capital of perfumery. The place where scents become art. I had read about this town in novels, seen it in pictures and magazines I secretly flipped through at newsstands, having no money to buy them. It was a dream on the level of flying to the moon. An unattainable, stupid childhood dream. I looked at the money. I looked at my new passport, which I had gotten just in case. Why not? I asked the silence. A week later, I stood at O'Hare International Airport. I was wearing a new sand-colored pantsuit, comfortable loafers, and a light scarf. In my suitcase there were no old sweaters or darn tights. There lay new dresses, linen shirts, and a wide-brimmed hat. Sebastian came to see me off. He stood shifting awkwardly from foot to foot, holding a small bouquet of wild flowers. Well, Angela, he handed me the flowers. You write or call? How is it there in those Paris? I'm not going to Paris, Sebastian. I'm going to Grasse, to flowers and oils. Same difference. He waved his hand. Just come back. I have, well, anyway, it'll be boring without you, without your tank driving. I smiled and hugged him. He smelled of gasoline and tobacco. But now that smell seemed to me the smell of reliability and friendship. I'll come back, Sebastian. But different. You're already different, he said. Seriously. You're alive. The plane lifted off the ground, carrying me away from the gray streets, from memories of betrayal, from the prison walls where my daughter sat. I looked at the clouds below and for the first time in years felt no guilt for doing something for myself. Grasse met me with sun and smells. God, what smells they were. Even the air here seemed to consist not of oxygen, but of the aroma of jasmine, rose, lavender, and mimosa. Narrow streets, old houses with tiled roofs, little shops selling soap and essences. I rented a tiny room in a boarding house from an elderly Madame Dupont who reminded me of my former self, fussy, kind, always busy. But I didn't sit in the room. I enrolled in perfume courses at the famous Gallimard workshop. Madam, you have an amazing nose, Mr. Bertrand, an old perfumer with grey mustaches looking like brushes, told me in the second class. You distinguish nuances that the young do not hear. You feel the soul of the fragrance. I just lived a long time in a world where smell spoke more than words, I replied. I learned to mix oils. I learned to understand how a top note transitions into a heart note, and then into a base. I was looking for my formula. I didn't want sweet. I didn't want a floral compote. I wanted to create the smell of freedom. The smell of the wind that blows in your face when you stand on the edge of a cliff and aren't afraid to fall. 3 months passed. Chicago seemed like a distant dream. I lost weight, got a tan. My movements became lighter. I no longer hunched. I walked through lavender fields, inhaling this purple fog, and felt every cell of my body filling with life. And then the day of the final exam arrived. I had to present my signature scent. I sat in a cafe on the square waiting for my turn. On the table before me stood a small dark glass vial. On the label written in my hand was just one word: rebirth. Inside was a complex composition. Bitter orange as a memory of insults. Sea salt like tears that have dried. Cedar as a core that didn't break. And a thin, barely perceptible note of white tea like hope for a new morning. I applied a drop to my wrist. Inhaled. It wasn't the smell of old age. It was the smell of a woman who knows her worth. The smell of strength, calm, and infinite dignity. I watched the passers-by, tourists, laughing students, elegant French women. I was part of this world. I was no longer my daughter's shadow. I was Angela. At that moment, my phone vibrated on the table. I flinched. An unfamiliar number lit up on the screen. Long, strange, but the country code was the US. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who it was. A collect call from a correctional facility. Renee. I stared at the screen, and time seemed to slow down. The cafe buzzed around me. Cups clinked. Someone laughed. But I heard only this persistent vibration. 3 months of silence. And now she calls. What will she say? Will she ask for money for a lawyer? Or maybe she finally understood. Maybe she wants to say sorry. Or will she splash me with hatred again? Accuse me of living it up in France while she sews gloves in a barracks. My finger hovered over the answer button. The old Angela, the one who saved pennies and swallowed insults, would have pressed accept without thinking. She would have rushed to save, to comfort, to send packages, to sell her new dresses, to pay for an extra commissary drop for her daughter. But I was sitting in grass. I was wearing a linen suit. On my wrist was the scent of rebirth. I remembered her face in the courtroom. I hate you. I remembered the garage, the death certificate. I cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. I cannot carry her cross. I gave her life. I gave her an education. I gave her everything I could. Now I must give her the most important thing, responsibility for her own actions. The phone continued to vibrate, demanding attention, demanding a return to the past. I slowly exhaled. No, I said quietly. My finger touched the red decline button. The screen went dark. The vibration stopped. I picked up the bottle of perfume, sprayed a little into the air in front of me, and walked into that cloud. Bitter orange, salt, cedar tea. I breathed in fully. The air was clean. I was free. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. The phone fell silent, but my hand still felt a phantom vibration, like the echo of an earthquake that had just ended without managing to destroy my new world. The black screen reflected the bright sky of Provence in my face, calm, without the shadow of guilt I was used to wearing like a second skin. I placed the phone on the sun-warm table next to the perfume bottle. Does Madame desire anything else? The waiter's voice pulled me out of my trance. A young guy with a smile that held not a drop of condescension, only professional courtesy and French lightness. I looked at him. Before I would have fussed, started counting change in my wallet, afraid of seeming insufficiently wealthy, or conversely too wasteful. I would have thought, this coffee costs as much as 5 pounds of rice. But now I simply smiled back. No thank you, Pierre. The check, please. I took a bill from my purse and placed it on the saucer, not waiting for change. It was money from the sold car, the very one in which I wasn't wanted. Now this money bought me not things but moments. Moments of silence and the right not to pick up the phone. I walked out of the cafe onto the cobbled street of grass. The sun stood at its zenith, flooding the city with golden light. Around me it smelled of heated stone cypress and the distant, barely perceptible scent of the sea. I walked slowly, feeling the linen fabric of my trousers touch my skin with every step. Light. I felt unbearably light. A group of tourists passed by. Among them was an elderly woman dragging a heavy suitcase on wheels behind her. And walking next to her was a young girl buried in her phone, not even trying to help. The woman was breathing heavily, wiping sweat from her forehead, but she stayed silent. I stopped. My heart pricked with familiar pity. I wanted to walk up, help, tell the girl to grab that damn suitcase, but I pulled myself back. That isn't my battle, and it isn't my suitcase. I had already carried mine to the final station and left it there. I turned into a narrow alley leading to the observation deck. Renee, right now, must be looking at the phone in her cell or in the hallway of the block, listening to the dial tone turn into silence. She is probably angry or crying or cursing me. But for the first time in my life, that wasn't my problem. My refusal wasn't revenge. It was the last lesson I could give her. The most important lesson that every person has a limit, and that love is not slavery. I walked out to the parapet. Below lay the valley covered in a carpet of flowers and vineyards. The wind hit my face, tasseling my hair, which I now dyed a noble chestnut shade instead of hiding under a gray scarf. I brought my wrist to my face and inhaled my scent. Rebirth. Renee was right. Absolutely cruelly right. That smell, the smell of old age, she spoke of with such contempt. It wasn't the smell of age. Old age can smell of comfort, wisdom, warm bread. What she smelled on me back then by the car was the smell of fear. The smell of a woman who forgot who she was. The smell of eternal economizing on oneself. The smell of laundered linens that are cherished more than one's own hands. The smell of a person who put themselves last in line for happiness. It was the smell of a victim. And it really is repulsive. But here on top of the hill, blown by the winds of France, I smelled different. I smelled of salt because I learned to heal wounds, not pick at them. I smelled of bitter orange because I accepted the bitterness of life as a necessary part of its taste. I smelled of cedar because I finally had a backbone. I closed my eyes. Somewhere out there in distant America remained my shattered cherry red dream, my empty apartment, and my daughter who has a long road ahead to find herself. I don't know if she will walk it. I don't know if she will call me in 2 years when she gets out. I don't know if I will answer. But I know one thing. I will never again buy a one-way ticket for someone else if I don't have a seat on that train myself. I opened my eyes and looked at the horizon where the sky met the earth in infinite blue. I am here, I said quietly, addressing no one in particular but the universe itself. I am Angela and I am just beginning to live. I turned around and walked away from the cliff back into the city where a lesson on creating solid perfumes and an evening walk awaited me. My steps sounded hollow on the cobblestones. These were the steps of a free woman. Dear listeners, that brings us to the end of Angela Vance's story. A story about sacrifice that turned into poison and betrayal that became a cure. It was not an easy path from humiliation on a night street to a sunny morning in Provence. And now, as the last page turns, I want to ask you, what would you have done? Was Angela right to press the decline button? After all, we were taught that a mother's heart must forgive everything. That a mother is an eternal donor, ready to give the last drop of blood. But where is the line where sacrifice becomes an accessory to evil? Was Angela's harshness the only way to save what was left of her soul? Or maybe you think a mother has no right to abandon a child, even if that child is 26 years old and has committed a crime. Write in the comments what you think. Do you judge Angela or are you proud of her? Could you have done the same? Your history and opinion are what make our stories alive. We read every comment. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your relationships with loved ones or your own worth, please support our channel. Hit the like button on this video. It helps us find new powerful stories for you. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter. After all, life writes the most incredible scripts. We wish you all the best. A window will appear in the center of the screen at the end of this video. Click on it to watch our other most exciting stories.